At 19, Anaya learned the price of silence long before anyone spoke it aloud. It began in her father's courtyard, where the neem tree cast a thin, tired shadow and the dust never quite settled. Men sat cross-legged on woven mats, their voices low and serious, as if discussing the weather instead of a girl's life. Anaya stood behind the half-closed door, fingers curled into the fabric of her dupatta, listening to words she pretended not to understand. Debt, harvest failure, honor agreement. Her mother sat near the wall, hands folded too tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on a crack in the mud plaster as if it were something sacred. When the final amount was named, it wasn't much. Even Anaya, who had never handled money of her own, knew it was small. Coins and notes changed hands with an awkward politeness. The sound of metal far louder than it should have been. Her father cleared his throat. Someone coughed. No one looked at her. That was the moment she understood what silence cost. Not tears, not screams, just a long, suffocating stillness that pressed against her chest until breathing felt like an effort. Her name was spoken only once at the end, like a formality. "The farmer lives at the edge of the valley," one of the elders said. "Quiet man. Keeps to himself." Another nodded. "Poor, but not cruel. That counts for something." Poor, quiet, not cruel. That was the sum of her future. Later, when her mother came to braid her hair that night, her fingers trembled. "It will be fine," she whispered, though her voice broke on the word fine. Anaya said nothing. If she opened her mouth, she feared something ugly and unstoppable might come out. Anger, or pleading, or hope, which would be worst of all. The days before the wedding passed in a blur of borrowed things. Borrowed jewelry that pinched her skin. A borrowed sari that smelled faintly of another woman's sweat and turmeric. Advice whispered by neighbors who leaned too close and spoke too loudly, as if warning her of danger while ensuring everyone else heard it too. "You must obey. You must endure. This is how life is." Anaya nodded, the good daughter, the sensible girl. Inside, something curled in on itself, small and watchful. She saw Ishan for the first time 2 days before the wedding in the market. She had gone with her cousin to buy lentils, her head covered, eyes lowered out of habit. He stood beside a wooden cart with a single crooked wheel, vegetables laid out in careful rows despite their tired appearance. His clothes were clean but worn thin, the kind of fabric that had been washed too many times and remembered it. Someone murmured his name behind her. She looked up without meaning to. He was not what she expected, though she wasn't sure what she had expected at all. He was not old, not frightening. His face was plain, sun-darkened, with a short beard that looked more practical than stylish. When his eyes lifted, they slid past her and fixed on a spot somewhere over her shoulder, as if she were not there at all. That hurt more than curiosity or appraisal would have. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply stood there, hat in his hands, fingers worrying the brim, as if waiting for someone to tell him where to go next. Anaya felt an irrational sting behind her eyes and turned away quickly, ashamed of the tears that threatened to come. The wedding day arrived without celebration. No drums echoed through the lanes. No children danced. The sky was pale and indifferent, the kind of day that refused to take sides. The ceremony was brief. Vows murmured, rituals completed with efficient movements. When Ishan stood beside her, she noticed how straight he held himself, as though afraid to take up too much space. When he tied the thread around her wrist, his hand shook. Just a little. Enough that she noticed. That small detail lodged itself in her mind. By evening, she was no longer her father's daughter. She was a wife. The word felt heavy, ill-fitting, like a garment several sizes too large. She climbed into the cart beside Ishan, her bundle of belongings at her feet, and did not look back. She was afraid if she did, she would see her mother crying. Or worse, already busy with something else, already moving on. The farmer's house sat at the edge of the valley, just as they had said. One room, a small cooking area, field stretching out behind it like an unspoken promise or a threat. The walls were bare. The floor swept clean. There was no welcome lamp burning, no flowers, no music. Inside, the silence felt different from her father's house. Their silence had been full of unsaid things. Here it was simply quiet. As night fell, an oil lamp was lit. Shadows jumped along the walls. Anaya sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded so tightly in her lap her fingers ached. Every story she had ever been told crowded her thoughts, each one heavier than the last. She stared at a dark stain on the wall and counted her breaths. preparing herself the way she had been taught to prepare by making herself small. Behind her, Ishan remained standing. She could hear him breathing, slow, controlled, too far away. Minutes passed. Her heart beat so loudly she was sure he must hear it. She waited for footsteps, for the creak of the bed, for the inevitable. None came. Instead, there was the scrape of wood against earth, the soft thud of a stool being moved, the rustle of cloth. Confusion slipped in where fear had been. She turned before she could stop herself. Ishan was lowering himself to the floor carefully, as though afraid to make noise. He spread a folded blanket beside the bed, his movements deliberate, almost reverent. He did not look at her, but his shoulders were tense, as if he were bracing for something. Anaya's breath caught. This was not how the stories went. The lamp flickered. The silence stretched thin and fragile. And for the first time since the neem tree courtyard, since the coins changed hands, Anaya felt something unfamiliar stir beneath her fear, uncertainty, and somewhere deep beneath that, the faintest, most dangerous thing of all. The possibility that the night might not end the way everyone had promised it would. "I won't," Ishan said, his voice barely louder than the hiss of the lamp. "Not unless you want me to." The words did not make sense at first. They hovered in the air between them, fragile and unreal, as if spoken in the wrong house, to the wrong person. Anaya stared at him, her mind searching for the trick hidden inside the sentence. Men did not say things like that. Not to girls like her, not on nights like this. He still had not looked at her. "I know what they told you," he went on quietly, kneeling on the packed earth floor as if the position itself were an apology, "and what they told me. But I don't want fear in this house. I grew up with it. It ruins everything it touches." Anaya's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her throat felt tight, as though the silence she had swallowed for weeks had hardened inside her. Ishan reached for the blanket again, folding it more neatly than necessary. "You don't know me," he said, "and I don't know you. If you leave this place tomorrow, I won't stop you. If you stay, then I want it to be because you choose to." Her hands began to shake. She pressed them against her skirt, stunned by the sudden weakness in her body. No one had ever offered her an exit before, even if the road beyond it was unclear. Just knowing there was a door made something in her chest ache painfully. "Why?" she whispered at last. He flinched slightly, as if surprised by her voice. Slowly he lifted his gaze. When their eyes met, she saw not coldness or calculation, but something raw and earnest that made her breath hitch. "Because being poor doesn't mean being empty," he said. "And because I don't want to become the kind of man people warned you about." He lay down on the floor, turning his face away from her, leaving a careful distance between them. The lamp flickered again, casting long shadows that softened the sharp edges of the room. Anaya sat there for a long time after his breathing slowed. She listened to the night sounds filtering in through the open window. Insects, distant dogs, the low sigh of wind through the fields. Her body slowly released the tension it had been holding, breath by breath, until exhaustion finally pulled her down into sleep. Morning came gently. She woke to the smell of tea and something warm cooking. For a moment panic surged through her. Then memory followed. And with it, disbelief. She sat up, the thin blanket slipping from her shoulders. Ishan stood near the small stove, his back to her, moving quietly. When he noticed she was awake, he stepped back at once, as though giving her space was a habit already forming. "I made tea," he said. "If you want." She nodded. The movement felt strange, like using a muscle she had forgotten she possessed. Days unfolded slowly after that, without rules being spoken, but with boundaries respected as if they were sacred. Ishan rose before sunrise, preparing his tools, eating little. He did not ask her to wake early or to work, but Anaya found herself doing so anyway, curiosity tugging her out of bed. She followed him to the fields, watched the way he studied the soil, how his silence was not emptiness but concentration. "You know this land well," she said one morning, surprising herself. He nodded. "It listens if you're patient." She smiled faintly at that, storing the words away. At the market, he handed her the small pouch of coins without comment. "For the vegetables," he said, as if it were obvious they were hers to manage. Her fingers curled around the pouch, stunned by the simple trust in the gesture. When she returned with change and new seeds, he thanked her as if she had done him a favor. At night they talked. At first only a little. Where she came from, what crops he hoped to grow next season. Then more, his mother who had died young. her childhood friend who used to braid her hair. Laughter slipped in cautiously, like a guest unsure of their welcome. Weeks passed. The blanket on the floor remained, but sometimes Anaya found herself sitting beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The first time their hands brushed, both of them froze, then laughed softly, embarrassed and relieved all at once. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the roof, Anaya spoke before fear could stop her. "If I stayed," she said, staring at the door, "what would you expect of me?" Ishan considered this carefully. "That you live," he said at last. "That you tell me when you're unhappy. That you don't disappear inside yourself." The words sank into her slowly, like seeds finding soil. She reached for his hand then, deliberately, her fingers trembling but sure. He did not move until she nodded, giving him permission without words. When he finally turned to face her fully, there was no hunger in his eyes, only gratitude and a tenderness, so overwhelming it made her chest ache. That night, when they lay together, it was with halting movements and whispered questions, pauses filled with listening rather than taking. It was not perfect. It was real. And for Anaya, that made all the difference. Months later, the fields looked different, healthier, greener. Neighbors noticed how Anaya walked through the market with her head high, how Ishan stood beside her instead of ahead or behind. People began to greet her by name. Sometimes, when she remembered the neem tree courtyard and the coins changing hands, a shadow passed through her mind. But it no longer owned her. What had been sold that day was a body, perhaps. But what had been given back on a quiet wedding night was far more powerful. A voice, a choice, and a life that for the first time felt like it truly belonged to her.